woman fleeing from the rain, until the widower from the ranch gave her a new reason to live. Sarah ran desperately down the dirt road, her heart racing and lungs burning. The torrential rain had started suddenly, and she knew she needed to find shelter before the storm got worse. At 27, she carried only an old backpack and some wet documents, fleeing a life that no longer made sense. The first building she spotted was a ranch with a worn wooden porch. Without hesitating, she ran over and threw herself under the roof, shivering from cold and fear. That's when she heard the sound of hooves approaching, and a deep voice cut through the air like thunder. "Get off my property right now." Sarah looked up and saw a man about 45 years old riding a black horse. His leather hat shielded part of his face, but she could see the graying beard and eyes as hard as stone. His clothes, dirty with soil, showed he worked hard, but there was something else in his expression, a deep bitterness that went beyond exhaustion. "Please, sir, just until the rain stops," Sarah pleaded, hugging herself to keep warm. "I said get out." Thomas dismounted from the horse with abrupt movements. "This isn't an inn. Go away." The rain intensified, and Sarah felt panic take over her body. Since she was little, storms terrified her, a mark she carried since the day she lost everything in a flood when she was only 8 years old. Her parents, the house, all her security, had been swept away by the waters in a matter of minutes. "I can't go out in the rain," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I can't." Thomas paused for a moment, noticing something different in the tone of her voice. It wasn't just fear of the rain. It was a genuine terror that he recognized because he also carried his own ghosts. 3 years ago, since Claire left, he had built walls around his heart, rejecting any form of human contact. 5 minutes, he grumbled, tying the horse to the post. "When it stops, you leave." Sarah nodded quickly, grateful for that small mercy. She watched the man approach, noticing how his shoulders carried an invisible weight. There was something familiar about that pain, an emptiness she knew well. In the last 2 years, since she started looking for Daniel, her younger brother, she had met many people like this, broken by life. "What's your name?" Thomas asked, more out of politeness than real interest. "Sarah. Sarah Miller." "And what's a girl like you doing wandering alone on these roads?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't usually tell her story to strangers, but there was something in the direct way he asked that made her want to answer honestly. "I'm looking for my brother. He disappeared 2 years ago, and someone told me he might have come to this area." Thomas watched her more closely. The old backpack, the simple but clean clothes, the determination mixed with desperation in her dark eyes. There was something about her that bothered him, not because it was bad, but because it stirred feelings he had buried long ago. "What's this brother like?" "Daniel Miller, 22 years old, dark-haired, thin, has a small scar on his forehead. He worked with horses before he had to leave town." The mention of horses made Thomas raise an eyebrow. Few young people still knew how to handle the animals in the traditional way. His ranch had gone through hard times, and he could barely keep the few horses that remained after Claire left, taking half of everything. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us beginners a lot. Now continuing. The rain began to let up, but Sarah was still shivering. Thomas noticed she was looking at the sky with anxiety, as if she expected the storm to return at any moment. There was something else going on here, something beyond a simple fear of getting wet. "Are you afraid of rain?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah lowered her eyes, embarrassed. It was a weakness she always tried to hide, but it was hard to disguise when panic took over her body. "Since I was a child, I lost my family in a flood. It was terrible." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. He knew the pain of loss well, though his was different. Claire hadn't been taken by a natural disaster, but by her own choices. One day she simply packed her bags and said she couldn't live on a remote ranch anymore, far from civilization. She said she felt suffocated, that she needed more from life. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, and it was the first time in years he'd said those words with sincerity. "Thank you. Daniel was all I had left. When he disappeared," Sarah swallowed hard. I can't give up looking for him. The rain had completely stopped, but Thomas realized he didn't have the heart to kick her out right away. There was something about her determination that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Besides, she'd mentioned her brother who worked with horses, and that sparked his curiosity. This area is big. Do you have any more specific clues? Sarah opened her backpack and pulled out some wet papers, trying to unroll them carefully so as not to tear them. I have some pictures of him and a letter I got from an old boss, saying Daniel had mentioned this area. But that was over a year ago. Thomas looked at the rain-damaged documents and felt a pang of compassion. It was clear she'd faced a lot to get here. Do you have a place to sleep tonight? I'm going to keep looking until dark, then I'll see if I can find somewhere in the nearest town. The nearest town is 40 miles from here, and it's going to rain again tonight. Sarah tried to hide the fear that information caused her. The thought of being on the road during a nighttime storm terrified her, but she didn't have many options. She'd spent almost all the money she'd managed to save searching for Daniel. I'll figure something out, she said, more to convince herself than him. Thomas sighed deeply. He knew he was making a mistake, but he couldn't just let her leave knowing she'd face the storm alone on the road. You can sleep in the barn tonight. Tomorrow morning you can continue your search. Sarah stared at him in surprise. She hadn't expected this change in attitude from the man who'd been so rude moments before. Are you sure? I don't want to be a bother. You're already a bother, he said, but his tone had lost its initial aggression. At least in the barn you'll stay dry, and I'll feel better knowing I won't find you drowned on the road tomorrow. Sarah smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. It was a shy smile, but genuine, and Thomas felt something strange stir in his chest. It had been so long since he'd seen anyone smile on his property. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thomas Harrison. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I promise I won't be any trouble. Thomas just nodded and started walking toward the barn, followed by Sarah. The wooden structure was simple but well kept, with a few empty stalls and clean hay spread across the floor. There were also some farming tools hanging on the walls, and the characteristic smell of horses, even with only 2 animals left. You can settle in over there in the corner, Thomas pointed. There are some old blankets in that chest, and don't touch anything. Of course, once again, thank you. Thomas was about to leave when he turned around again. Do you have anything to eat? Sarah shook her head. She had only eaten a slice of bread that morning, but she didn't want to seem needier than she already looked. I'll bring you something, he said, stepping out before she could protest. Alone in the barn, Sarah allowed herself to take a deep breath and relax for the first time in days. The place was rustic but welcoming, and there was something comforting in the scent of hay and wood. She approached one of the horses, a light brown animal watching her with curiosity. Hey, beautiful, she murmured, reaching out her hand slowly. What's your name? The horse let her touch him, letting out a soft whinny. Sarah smiled, remembering how Daniel loved horses when they were kids. He always said animals were more honest than people, that they didn't hide their intentions. 15 minutes later, Thomas returned with a simple plate of pot roast with mashed potatoes, along with a bottle of water. It's nothing fancy, but it'll take the edge off your hunger, he said, handing her the plate. It's perfect. Thank you so much, really. Sarah ate in silence while Thomas tended to the horses. She watched him work, noticing how sure and gentle his movements were with the animals. There was a tenderness there that contrasted with the hardness he showed toward people. Your horses are beautiful, she commented. There used to be 12. Now only these 2 are left. What happened to the others? Thomas stopped what he was doing, and Sarah realized she had touched on a painful subject. I had to sell them to pay off debts. When my wife left, she took half of everything, including the best horses. I'm sorry. That must have been really hard. It was. Especially because she took Star, a colt I'd raised since he was born. He was special. Sarah finished eating and handed back the empty plate. Have you heard from her? No, and I don't want to. Claire made her choice. She said life here was too hard, too isolated, that she deserved something better. There was pain in Thomas's voice, but also a deep resignation. Sarah recognized that kind of hurt, the one that comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted completely. And you? Ever thought of going after her? What for? To hear again that I'm not enough, that this life isn't worth anything? Thomas shook his head. Some people aren't meant to stay. It's better to accept that early on. Sarah wanted to say something comforting, but she knew empty words wouldn't help. Instead, she stayed silent, letting him finish taking care of the horses. I'll let you rest, Thomas said finally. Tomorrow morning, I'll show you the trails to the neighboring ranches. Maybe someone has seen your brother. Thank you, truly. Thomas nodded and left the barn, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She settled into the old blankets, which smelled of lavender, probably a leftover from the days when a woman ran that house. Looking up at the wooden ceiling, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe tomorrow she'd get a lead on Daniel. Outside, the wind began to blow stronger, signaling another approaching storm. Sarah closed her eyes and tried not to think about the rain to come. For the first time in months, she felt somewhat safe. In the main house, Thomas poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat on the porch, watching the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman sleeping in his barn. There was something about her that stirred feelings he had sworn to bury forever. Claire had left on a stormy night, just like the one approaching. She said she couldn't stand the loneliness, the silence, the simple life he offered anymore. She wanted lights, movement, people. She wanted to be someone other than the wife of a horse breeder lost in the countryside. But Sarah was different. There was a quiet strength in her, a determination that impressed him. Even afraid of the storm, even without resources, she hadn't given up searching for her brother. There was something admirable in this stubbornness, in this unconditional loyalty. The first thunder echoed in the distance, and Thomas wondered if she was all right in the barn. He knew storms scared her, but he couldn't just go check on her. He was already getting more involved than he should with a complete stranger. In the barn, Sarah woke up to the sound of wind hitting the wood. The rain had started again, and she could hear the heavy drops falling on the roof. Her heart began to race, and she pulled the blankets over her head, trying to block out the sound. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners out. Now, continuing, the flood memories came rushing back full force. She was 8 years old when she woke up to her parents screaming for her to climb onto the roof. The water had invaded the house during the early morning hours, and within minutes it was waist deep. She remembered the desperation in her mother's eyes, the strength with which her father pushed her up before being swept away by the current. Sarah began trembling uncontrollably. The horses were restless too, whinnying softly and moving around in their stalls. The storm was getting stronger and the thunder made the barn vibrate. That's when she heard footsteps approaching. The door opened and Thomas appeared with a flashlight in his hand, his hair wet from the rain. "Are you okay?" he asked, immediately noticing her state. Sarah tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. She was completely paralyzed by panic, reliving the worst night of her life. Thomas understood immediately what was happening and approached slowly the way he would with a frightened horse. "Take a deep breath," he said in a calm voice. "It's just a storm, it'll pass." "I can't," Sarah whispered. "It's too strong, like that night." Thomas sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to convey safety. "Tell me about that night. Sometimes talking helps." Sarah looked at him through her tears. It had been so long since she'd talked about the flood with anyone. Even Daniel didn't know all the details. "I was a child. I lived with my parents in a little house near the river. No one expected it to rain so much. When I woke up, the water was already coming through the door." Thomas listened in silence as she told him how she had lost her parents that night, how she had stayed on the roof until rescue came the next morning, how she had spent years in orphanages until Daniel turned 18 and got custody of her. "He always took care of me," Sarah said, calming down a little. "He worked 2 jobs to keep me in school. He never complained, never made me feel like a burden. That's why I can't give up looking for him." "And what happened for him to disappear?" Sarah hesitated. It was the part of the story she was most ashamed of because she felt responsible for what happened. "He got involved with the wrong people. He owed money, a lot of money. One night he came home all beaten up, said he needed to leave town. That if he stayed, something terrible might happen to me, too. I see. He promised he'd get in touch as soon as it was safe, but that was 2 years ago. I only got 2 letters, the last one over a year ago. I can't accept that something bad has happened to him. The storm began to subside gradually, and Sarah realized she had stopped trembling. Thomas's presence had been more effective than any medicine at calming her panic. "Thank you," she said, "for staying." "It was nothing. I've been through some tough storms myself." They stayed silent for a few minutes, listening to the rain diminish until it became just a soft dripping. Sarah felt strangely connected to the man she had met only a few hours ago. There was an honesty in his presence that put her at ease. "Can I ask you something?" she finally said. "Go ahead. Why did you change your mind? About letting me stay, I mean." Thomas thought for a moment before answering. "Because I saw something in you that I recognized. The pain of someone who lost someone important, and because it's been a long time since I've seen someone fight so hard for something." Sarah felt her heart warm at this unexpected response. She had been so used to being seen as an intruder, a nuisance, that his kindness caught her off guard. "Didn't your wife fight for you too?" "Claire did fight, yes, but against me, against this life. In the end, she won." "No, she didn't. If she had won, you'd still be together." Thomas looked at her with surprise. It was a perspective he had never considered. "What do you mean?" "If she had really fought for you two, she would have stayed and worked to make things better together. Running away isn't fighting, it's giving up." There was a simple wisdom in these words that touched Thomas deeply. For 3 years, he had blamed himself for not being enough for Claire. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe the fault wasn't just his. "I've never thought of it that way," he admitted. "When you truly love someone, you don't abandon them at the first sign of trouble. My brother could have left me at any orphanage and gone on with his life, but he didn't. He fought for both of us." The rain had stopped completely, and a peaceful silence settled over the barn. Thomas stood up, realizing Sarah was calmer. "I'll let you rest now. Tomorrow we'll talk about where to look for your brother." "Thomas," Sarah called out when he was already at the door. "Yes. Thank you for not judging me. For understanding." He just nodded and walked out, but Sarah could see a small smile on his face before the door closed. For the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe she wasn't entirely alone in the world. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of someone working in the yard. She looked out the small window of the barn and saw Thomas feeding the horses, his movements efficient and careful. The golden light of dawn surrounded him, and she realized he was younger than she had first thought. His graying beard and expression lines aged him, but his eyes had the vitality of someone who still had a lot of living to do. She got up, folded the blankets, and straightened the spot where she had slept. She didn't want to cause more trouble than she already was. When she stepped out of the barn, Thomas greeted her with a nod. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you. And sorry about last night. I know you must have found it strange." "Everyone has their ghosts," he said simply. "There's nothing strange about that." Sarah smiled, grateful for his understanding. She watched him work for a few minutes, noting how the horses responded positively to his presence. It was clear he had a natural gift with animals. "Can I help with anything?" she offered. Thomas looked at her with surprise. He had been used to working alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to have help. "Do you know anything about horses?" "A little. Daniel taught me some things when we were younger. Nothing too advanced, but I know the basics." "You can help me clean out the stalls then. The tools are over there." Sarah grabbed a shovel and started working, moving with a familiarity that impressed Thomas. It was evident she really knew what she was doing, working with efficiency and care. "Your brother taught you well," he commented. "Daniel was always good with animals. He said they can tell if someone has a good or a bad heart. That's why I always trusted his judgment of people." "And what would he say about me?" asked Thomas, half joking, half curious. Sarah stopped working and watched him for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I'd say you have a good heart, but a bruised one. That you just need someone who can see past the pain." The answer caught Thomas off guard. There was a sincerity in her that touched him deeply. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him that way, so direct and yet so kind. "Didn't your mother teach you not to talk too much to strangers?" he said, trying to hide how much her comment had affected him. "My mother taught me that kindness recognizes kindness, and that sometimes strangers are the only people who can truly see us." They kept working in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah felt oddly at home in that place, as if she belonged there. Thomas, for his part, noticed that the work felt lighter with company, more meaningful. When they finished, he invited her in for coffee. "It's the least I can do before you hit the road again." The house was simple but cozy, with dark wooden furniture and floral curtains that had clearly been chosen by a woman. There were photographs on the wall, most showing Thomas next to a pretty blonde woman, both smiling happily. "Is that Claire?" Sarah asked, looking at one of the photos. "Was. I took most of them down, but I haven't managed to take these ones down yet." Sarah studied the photographs closely. Claire was indeed beautiful, with golden hair and a perfect smile. But there was something in her eyes, a restlessness that Sarah recognized. It was the look of someone always searching for something better, something more. "You look happy in these photos." "We were. At least I thought we were. But Claire always wanted more than I could give. More adventure, more excitement, more everything." Sarah sat down at the kitchen table while Thomas made coffee. The place had a rustic charm she loved, so different from the cramped little apartment she'd lived in with Daniel. "And you? Never wanted to get married? Start a family?" Sarah blushed slightly. "I never had time to think about it. Ever since Daniel disappeared, my only concern has been finding him. But yes, I always dreamed of having a family. A solid foundation, you know? Something nobody could take away from me." "I understand. I always wanted that too. I thought I had it with Claire, but..." He shrugged. "Sometimes people change, or maybe we never really knew them." Thomas poured the coffee into simple porcelain cups, along with homemade bread and apple butter. Sarah ate with pleasure, realizing it had been a long time since she had truly enjoyed a home-cooked meal. "This is delicious. Did you make it yourself?" "Learned out of necessity. When Claire left, either I learned to fend for myself or I went hungry. Well, you learned well." They chatted over breakfast about trivial matters, but Sarah could tell Thomas was more relaxed, less defensive. A growing ease between them made her feel comfortable. "Well, about your brother," he finally said. "I know most of the ranchers around here. I'll give you some directions and names of people who might have seen him." Thomas drew a rough map on a piece of paper, marking the nearest ranches and main roads in the area. "Start at Mr. Frank's ranch here. He hires a lot of temporary workers and has a good memory for faces. Then you can go over to Mrs. Pearl's place. She always knows everything that's going on around here." Sarah studied the map carefully, memorizing the directions. "Thank you so much for everything. I don't know how I can repay your kindness." "You don't have to repay anything. Just be careful out there. And if you don't find any leads, you can come back here tonight. I don't want you stuck on the road if it rains again." Sarah felt her heart warm at the genuine concern in his voice. "Deal. And Thomas? If I find Daniel, I'd like to bring him here to meet you. I think you two would get along." Thomas just nodded, but Sarah could see the idea pleased him. She said goodbye and set off down the dirt road, consulting the map regularly. The first stop would be Mr. Frank's ranch, which lay about 5 miles from there. The day was clear and sunny, a welcome change after the storm the night before. Mr. Frank's ranch was much larger than Thomas's, with several buildings and a constant bustle of workers. Sarah headed to the main house and was greeted by a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Martha, the farmer's wife. "Mr. Frank is out in the pasture, but can I help you with something?" the woman asked warmly. Sarah explained she was looking for her brother and showed the photograph of Daniel. Martha studied the image carefully. That face looks familiar. "Frank," she shouted toward the pasture. "Come here a minute." Mr. Frank was a short, stocky man with a sunburned face and an easy smile. He looked at the photo and scratched his head thoughtfully. "I've seen this young man before, yes, but not here on my ranch. It was, let me think, in town, at the market. He was talking to Hank from the mechanic shop. Sarah felt her heart race. It was the first concrete lead she'd had in months. When was that? About 6 months ago, maybe more. I remember because I thought it was odd, a city boy chatting so animatedly with Hank. They seemed to know each other well. Sarah thanked him profusely for the information and headed to town. The mechanic shop was on the main street, a small but busy establishment. She found Hank working under an old truck. "Excuse me, Hank from the shop?" The mechanic slid out from under the vehicle, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "Can I help you, miss?" Sarah showed the photo of Daniel and explained her situation. Hank's face immediately closed up, and she could tell she'd touched on a sensitive topic. "Don't know that young man," he said, looking away, "but Mr. Frank said he saw you two talking at the market a few months ago." "Mr. Frank is mistaken. Never seen that guy in my life." It was clear Hank was lying, but Sarah didn't know how to make him talk. There was fear in his eyes, as if he dreaded the consequences of revealing information about Daniel. "Please, Hank from the shop. He's my brother. I'm very worried. I already told you I don't know him, and I suggest you stop asking questions around here. Sometimes it's better to leave things as they are." The threatening tone in the mechanic's voice frightened Sarah. Something was very wrong, something involving her brother that left people afraid to speak. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners. Now, continuing, Sarah left the shop with more questions than answers. If Hank knew Daniel but was afraid to admit it, it meant her brother had gotten involved in something serious. Maybe the debts that made him leave town were worse than she imagined. She decided to continue her search at the other ranches, hoping to find someone more willing to talk. Mrs. Pearl's property was on the other side of town, about an hour's walk. Mrs. Pearl was a widow in her 60s, known for her sharp tongue and knowledge of everything happening in the area. She greeted Sarah with curiosity and hospitality. "Come in, dear. Would you like some coffee? You look tired." Sarah gratefully accepted the offer and sat down in the cozy ranch kitchen. Mrs. Pearl was the kind of person who inspired trust, with her grey hair pinned up in a bun and her bright, intelligent eyes. "Now tell me, what's a pretty young woman like you doing looking for people around here?" Sarah told her story once more and showed the photo of Daniel. Mrs. Pearl studied the image closely, frowning. "This young man? Yes, I've seen him. But not by the name you said." "What do you mean?" "He went by Stephen Rogers. Worked here at the ranch for about 2 months, some 8 months back. Good worker, knew his way around horses, but he was always nervous, like he was running from something." Sarah felt the world spin. Daniel had used a fake name and had been right there, so close. Why hadn't he gotten in touch with her? What happened to him? Why did he leave? Mrs. Pearl hesitated before answering. "Some men showed up here looking for him. They weren't from around these parts, had the look of people who mean business. Stephen disappeared that same night before they came back." "What kind of men?" "The kind you don't want to meet, girl. Debt collectors, if you catch my drift. Stephen owed money to dangerous people." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Mrs. Pearl's words confirmed her worst fears. Daniel was running from people who could seriously hurt him. Did he say anything about where he was going? He mentioned a name. Let me think. Oh, yes. He said he was looking for work at Thomas Harrison's ranch. He'd heard the man needed help with horses. Sarah almost choked on her coffee. Daniel had mentioned Thomas specifically. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Are you sure he said that name?" "Absolutely. I even asked if he knew Thomas, but he said no, that he'd only heard talk in town." Sarah thanked her for the information and left Mrs. Pearl's house with her head spinning. Daniel had planned to seek out Thomas 8 months ago, but he'd never made it to his ranch. What had happened along the way? She decided to go straight back to Thomas's property. He might have important information, even without knowing it. During the walk back, Sarah tried to piece together the puzzle. Daniel had fled the city 2 years ago because of debts. He'd worked at Mrs. Pearl's ranch under a fake name until the collectors found him. He'd planned to look up Thomas, but had disappeared before getting there. Where was he now? Was he alive? Was he still running from the same men? When she arrived at Thomas's ranch, it was already mid-afternoon. She found him fixing a fence near the house, sweaty and focused on his work. "Back early," he commented, wiping his hands on his shirt. "Get any information?" Sarah told him everything she'd found out, watching Thomas's expression change as the story unfolded. When she mentioned that Daniel had specifically planned to seek him out, he stopped what he was doing entirely. "Are you sure Mrs. Pearl said my name?" "Absolutely. Thomas, why would my brother know about you? You two never met, right?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, clearly disturbed by this revelation. "Not that I remember, but there is a possibility." "What?" "About a year ago, I started getting letters from someone interested in buying horses. The letters were signed by a certain Stephen Rogers, who said he was a representative for a breeder from another state. We never actually met because he kept putting it off, but we exchanged several letters." Sarah felt her heart race. "Do you still have those letters?" "I do. They're back at the house." They ran to the house, and Thomas rummaged through a drawer until he found a stack of envelopes. Sarah immediately recognized Daniel's handwriting on the first letter she opened. "It's him," she exclaimed, tears in her eyes. "It's my brother's handwriting." Thomas read the letters over her shoulder. They were all about horses, deals, technical questions on breeding. But there was something strange about them, as if the sender was trying to assess Thomas's character through the correspondence. "Look at this one," said Sarah, pointing to a passage. "He asks about your family, if you live alone, if you have employees. Those aren't normal questions about buying horses." Thomas read the letter again carefully. "You're right. It's like he was investigating whether I could be trusted for something." "But for what?" "I don't know. But the last letter I received was exactly 6 months ago. After that, I never heard from him again." Sarah checked the dates on the letters. The timeline matched the information Mrs. Pearl had given. Daniel had stopped writing when he ran away from her ranch. "Thomas, I need to tell you something," said Sarah, steeling herself. "I think my brother wasn't just running from ordinary debts. I think he got involved with very dangerous people." "What kind of people?" "Before he disappeared, he came home one night all beaten up. He said he had gotten himself into trouble, that he owed money to people who didn't forgive debts. But now, seeing how people react when I ask about him—" Sarah didn't finish the sentence, but Thomas understood the implication. There was genuine fear in the people who knew Daniel, the kind of fear that comes from messing with the wrong kind of people. "And you think he was coming here looking for help?" "Maybe. Or maybe looking for a safe place to hide. The letters show he was studying you for months, trying to figure out if he could trust you." Thomas sat down heavily in a chair. The situation was getting more complicated than he had imagined. It wasn't just a girl looking for her lost brother. It was a woman whose brother was running from dangerous people and who, for some reason, had chosen his ranch as a possible refuge. "Sarah, I don't know if I can get involved in this. If those men who were looking for your brother find out he was in contact with me—" Sarah felt her heart sink. She could see the fear growing in Thomas's eyes, and she didn't blame him. She herself was terrified by the implications of her discoveries. "I understand," she said in a small voice. "I don't want to put you in danger. I'll keep looking on my own." But even as she said it, Sarah knew she was lost. She had nowhere to go, not enough money to keep searching indefinitely. And now she had discovered Daniel was involved with people who left everyone around them afraid. Thomas looked at her and saw the desperation she was trying to hide. Sarah was trying to be strong, but it was clear she was at her breaking point, and despite his fear, he couldn't simply abandon her to her fate. "Stay tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow we'll decide what to do." Sarah nodded, grateful for another day of safety. But they both knew the situation had changed drastically. It was no longer a simple search for a lost brother. It was a dangerous matter that could bring serious consequences for both of them. That night, during dinner, they were quieter than the day before. The weight of their discoveries hung over them like a dark cloud. Sarah poked at her food without much appetite, lost in thoughts about Daniel and the dangers he faced. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said suddenly. Sure. Why is it so important for you to find your brother? I mean, if he's running from dangerous people, maybe it's better to let him disappear for a while. Sarah looked up from her plate, and Thomas could see the deep pain in her eyes. Because he saved my life. After our parents were lost in the flood, Daniel was only 16. He could have left me at the orphanage and moved on with his life, but he didn't. He worked 2 jobs, studied at night, fought to give me a better life. She never made me feel like a burden, never complained about the sacrifices she made for me. I understand. When he got mixed up in this mess, it was trying to get money to help me. I wanted to take a technical course, and he was desperate to pay for it. That's when he took a job he shouldn't have, with people who were no good. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest hearing the guilt in Sarah's voice. It was clear she held herself responsible for what had happened to her brother. It wasn't your fault. Yes, it was. If I hadn't pushed so hard about the course, if I had been more independent. Sarah, look at me. She lifted her eyes, trying to hold back tears. Your brother made a choice. It might have been the wrong choice, but it was his. You can't carry the guilt for decisions other people make, even when those decisions were motivated by love. Thomas's words touched Sarah deeply. It was the first time in 2 years that someone had told her she wasn't to blame for Daniel's disappearance. But if something happened to him, then you'll honor his memory by continuing to live. That's what he fought so hard for, so you could have a good life. Not for you to spend the rest of your life blaming yourself and searching for him. Sarah started crying silently. They were tears of relief, of pain, of 2 years of guilt finally finding an outlet. Thomas stood up and, after a moment of hesitation, placed his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. I didn't mean to. You don't need to apologize. Sometimes you have to cry to see things clearly. They finished dinner in silence, but it was a different silence than before. There was mutual understanding now, a connection that went beyond simple hospitality. Sarah, Thomas said when they were at the barn door. About tomorrow. I'm going to help you find your brother. Thomas, you don't have to. I know it's dangerous. It is dangerous. But it's also the right thing to do, and it's been a long time since I've done something I know is right. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. She had found more than shelter from the storm in Thomas. She had found an ally, someone willing to take risks for her without asking for anything in return. Thank you, she whispered. Truly. Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we start a real investigation. Sarah entered the barn with a lighter heart than she'd had in months. For the first time since Daniel disappeared, she didn't feel completely alone. There was someone on her side, someone who believed her family was worth fighting for. Outside, Thomas stood for a few minutes looking at the stars. He was getting himself into a situation that could bring serious trouble to his quiet life. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was doing something that really mattered. Claire had always accused him of being too settled, of not having enough ambition to seek a better life. Maybe she was right about the ambition, but she was wrong about one thing. He knew how to fight when he found something worth standing up for. And Sarah, with her quiet determination and unwavering loyalty, was definitely worth it. The next morning, Thomas woke up with a plan. During the night, he had thought a lot about the information they had and how they could use it to find Daniel without putting themselves in unnecessary danger. Sarah was already awake when he reached the barn, sitting on the hay and reading Daniel's letters once more. Find anything new? He asked. Maybe. Look at this one, the last letter he sent. He mentions looking for a safe place to hide something valuable. He doesn't give details, but... Thomas read the passage she pointed to. Could be a reference to himself, looking for a safe place to hide. Or it could be literal. Maybe he has something he needs to hide, something that would justify all this pursuit. It was a possibility they hadn't considered before. If Daniel possessed something valuable enough to draw the attention of dangerous people, it would explain why he was being pursued so relentlessly. What kind of thing would be valuable enough to justify chasing someone for 2 years? Sarah pondered the question. Money, drugs, compromising information. Or She paused, an idea forming in her mind. Or what? Daniel was always good with numbers. He worked as an accounting assistant before all this happened. What if he found out something he wasn't supposed to? Some irregularity, some scheme? Thomas nodded thoughtfully. It was a possibility that made sense. If Daniel had uncovered evidence of illegal activities at his job, it would explain both the pursuit and his fear of contacting Sarah. Let's talk to someone who knew your brother before he disappeared. Someone from his work, maybe. Good idea. But that means going back to the town where it all started. And what if those men are still looking for him there? Then we'll have to be careful. Do you know where he worked? Yes. It was a small accounting office run by Mr. Arthur. He was always good to Daniel, almost like a father. Arthur might have important information. It's worth a shot. Sarah bit her lower lip, clearly apprehensive about returning home. What if it's a trap? What if they're waiting for me to show up? Then we need to be smarter than them. We'll do this the right way, without putting ourselves at unnecessary risk. Thomas was surprised by his own determination. It had been years since he felt this clarity of purpose, this will to fight for something important. Sarah had awakened in him a sense of purpose he thought he'd lost forever. When would we leave? Today. The longer we wait, the colder the trail gets. We'll drive to be faster. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the logic of his argument. She was nervous, but also hopeful. For the first time in 2 years, she felt she was on the right path to find Daniel. Thomas, she said as they prepared to leave. Yes? Why are you doing this? Why are you risking yourself for someone you don't even know? Thomas stopped what he was doing and looked her in the eyes. Because it's been a long time since I've seen someone fight with such determination for something that truly matters. Because you reminded me that there are still things in this world worth defending. And because you reminded me of who I was before I became this bitter, lonely man. The brutal honesty of his answer left Sarah speechless. There was a raw truth in those words that touched her deeply. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me yet. We haven't found your brother. It's not just for that. It's for making me feel like I'm not alone, for giving me hope again. Thomas felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he'd tried to suppress for 3 years. It was dangerous to feel connected to someone again, to open himself up to the possibility of being hurt. But looking at Sarah, with her quiet determination and genuine gratitude, he realized some risks were worth taking. We'll find your brother, he said firmly. I promise. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Harrison made a promise he intended to keep regardless of the cost. The trip to Sarah's hometown took 3 hours. Along the way, she told him more details about her life with Daniel, about the jobs he'd had, about the people they knew. Thomas listened carefully, asking occasional questions and helping her build a more complete profile of Daniel's life before the disappearance. Mr. Arthur's office is downtown, Sarah explained as they neared their destination. It's on a busy street with a lot of traffic. It'll be easy to go unnoticed. And where did you two live? In a small apartment near the bus station. But I don't want to go there. Too many bad memories. Thomas understood. There were also places in his own life he preferred to avoid, places where memories of Claire still hurt too much. They parked a few blocks from the accounting office and walked slowly, observing the movement around them. It was a normal Thursday afternoon, with people coming and going from their jobs, completely unaware of the drama Sarah had lived through on those same streets. The office was small but well organized, with 2 secretaries at the reception desk and the sound of adding machines echoing from the back. One of the secretaries, a middle-aged woman with thick glasses, looked up when they entered. Can I help you? I'd like to speak with Mr. Arthur, please. It's about Daniel Miller. The woman's expression changed immediately. There was recognition in the name, but also caution. Please wait a moment. She disappeared into the back of the office and returned a few minutes later with a short, stocky man about 60 years old. His eyes filled with tears when he saw Sarah. Sarah, my dear girl, Arthur exclaimed, opening his arms. How are you? Where have you been? Sarah let the old accountant hug her, feeling a wave of emotion. Arthur had been like a grandfather to her and Daniel, always concerned about their well-being. Mr. Arthur, This is Thomas. He's helping me look for Daniel. Arthur greeted Thomas with a firm handshake, but his eyes remained worried. Come on. Let's talk in my office. Brenda, no visits for the next few minutes. Arthur's private office was cozy, filled with organized papers and family photos. He offered coffee and sat down behind the desk, studying Sarah with a fatherly gaze. First, I want you to know I'm very worried about you two. Daniel disappeared overnight and you vanished soon after. I tried to find you, but no one knew where you were. I left to look for him, Mr. Arthur. I've been traveling for 2 years now, following leads. I need to know what happened. Arthur sighed deeply, as if carrying a heavy burden for a long time. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you might be hard to hear, but you deserve to know the truth. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. It was clear Arthur knew more about the situation than she had imagined. Daniel was involved in something very serious, Arthur continued. A few months before he disappeared, he discovered irregularities in the books of one of our clients. They weren't simple mistakes. They were deliberate manipulations to hide large sums of money. What kind of client? A transportation company. At least that's what they claimed to be. But Daniel suspected it was a front for other activities. Money laundering, maybe worse. Sarah felt the blood run cold in her veins. Her worst suspicions were being confirmed. What did he do when he found out? He came to talk to me first. I told him to leave it alone, that it was dangerous to mess with that kind of people. But Daniel, you know your brother. He has a very strong sense of justice. He said he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen anything. Did he report it? He never got that far. But he started making copies of the compromising documents. He said he needed solid evidence before doing anything. Thomas leaned forward. And what happened to those copies? Arthur looked nervously at the door, as if afraid of being heard. Daniel was keeping everything in a bank-safe deposit box. He said it was a kind of life insurance. If something happened to him, the documents would protect you, Sarah. Protect them how? He thought that if the truth came to light, the people behind the scheme would leave you alone. There would be no reason for them to hunt you anymore. Sarah began to understand Daniel's strategy. He wasn't just running. He was trying to build a defense for both of them. Mr. Arthur, do you know where that safe is? I do. At the Federal Trust Bank, downtown branch. But there's a problem. What? To open the safe, you need 2 keys. Daniel had one, and he left the other with me for emergencies. But a few months ago, strange men showed up here asking about him. They offered a lot of money for the key, and when I refused, they made threats. Sarah felt panic rising. Did you give them the key? No. But I couldn't keep it here anymore either. It was too dangerous, so I hid it somewhere else. Where? Arthur hesitated for a long moment. Sarah, if I tell you where the key is, you'll want to go after the documents. And that could be very dangerous. Those men are still out there, still searching. Mr. Arthur, said Thomas, chiming in on the conversation, if Daniel set up this plan to protect his sister, then those documents might be her only chance to have a normal life again. They can't keep running forever. The old accountant looked at Thomas, sizing him up. And who are you in this story, son? Why are you risking yourself? Because Sarah deserves help, and because sometimes you have to do what's right, even when it's dangerous. Arthur studied Thomas's face for a long moment, as if trying to read his character. Finally, he slowly nodded. The key is hidden in my house, in my mother's Bible, on the living room bookshelf. But Sarah, he looked at her seriously. If you do this, there's no turning back. Once you access that safe, those people will know, and they'll come after you with everything they've got. Sarah swallowed hard. It was a decision that would change her life forever. She could keep running and searching for Daniel, always living in fear and uncertainty, or she could try to finish what he had started, risking the same people who made him disappear. There's one thing I need to know first, she said. Do you think Daniel is still alive? Arthur lowered his eyes and Sarah saw the pain in his expression. I don't know, girl, I hope so, but it's been so long without any word, and these people don't usually leave loose ends. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them back. She had reached the moment of truth and needed to make a final decision. "Thomas," she said finally, "if we do this, you could be putting yourself in danger for the rest of your life. I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking, I'm offering." "Why?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "Because for the last 3 years, since Claire left, I've been living like a coward. I hid at the ranch, avoided risks, avoided feelings, avoided truly living. You showed me there are still things in this world worth fighting for, and if I don't fight for you now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what kind of man I really am." Sarah felt her heart tighten at the brutal honesty of his words. There was much more going on between them than just helping out, and they both knew it. "It's settled then," she said, turning to Arthur. "We'll get the key." "Sarah," said the old accountant, "there's one more thing you need to know." "What?" "Daniel left a message for you, in case something happened to him, and you came looking for me." Arthur opened a locked drawer in the desk and pulled out a sealed envelope with Sarah's name written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. "He insisted I give this only to you, and only if you showed you were ready to know the whole truth." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. She recognized Daniel's handwriting, the way he made his S and A letters. It was really from him, no doubt about it. "Can I read it now?" "You can, but brace yourself. Daniel knew a lot more about the situation than you think." Sarah carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Daniel's handwriting, always clear and neat, filled 2 full pages. "My dear sister, if you're reading this letter, it means something happened to me, and that you had the courage to go after the truth. First, I want you to know that everything I did was to protect you. Every decision, every lie, every moment I spent away from you was with your safety in mind. When I uncovered the scheme at Continental Logistics, I immediately knew I was dealing with very dangerous people. They're not just thieves or tax evaders. They're people involved in much worse things: trafficking, money laundering, large-scale corruption, the kind of people who don't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their business. I know you must be feeling guilty, thinking it was because of you that I got mixed up in this mess. It wasn't. The truth is, when I started investigating, I discovered something that changed everything. Our parents didn't die in a natural accident. Sarah, the flood that took our parents was caused on purpose. Someone opened the dam gates during a storm to cover up other illegal activities happening in the area. Our parents found out something they shouldn't have, and they were silenced along with several other families. It took me years to gather the evidence, working in secret while pretending to be just an ordinary accountant. The documents in the safe aren't just about money laundering. They're proof of a scheme involving murders, government corruption, and environmental destruction that's been going on for decades. If you're reading this, it means it's time to finish what I started. But Sarah, you don't have to do this alone. Trust Mr. Arthur, he's a good man. And if someone is genuinely helping you, keep that person close to you. In times like this, we find out who really cares about us. The documents in the safe contain enough evidence to bring down the entire organization. But once you touch them, there's no turning back. They'll know and they'll come after you. Be ready to fight or to run far away. I always knew you were stronger than you thought. Ever since you were a child, you always showed a courage I envied. Now, it's time to use that courage to bring justice, not just for us, but for all the families who suffered like ours did. If something happened to me, don't blame yourself. And if you make it out of this, build the life you always dreamed of. Find someone who truly loves you, have children, be happy. That's what I always wanted for you. Love you forever, Daniel. Sarah finished reading the letter with tears streaming freely down her face. Thomas and Arthur waited in silence, respecting her pain. When she finally looked up, there was a fierce determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Our parents were murdered," she said in a controlled voice, "and Daniel spent years gathering evidence to bring justice." "Sarah," Arthur began. "No, I'm not giving up now. Daniel sacrificed everything to get this far. I can't let it be in vain." Thomas approached her and for the first time took her hand in his. "Then let's finish this together." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the same determination she felt growing in her own chest. She had found in Thomas more than an ally. She had found someone willing to fight by her side, no matter what happened. "Mr. Arthur," she said, turning to the accountant, We need the key. Today. Sarah, are you sure? Once you do this, I'm sure. Daniel was right. It's time to stop running and start fighting. Arthur nodded gravely and stood up. Then let's go to my house. But I want you to understand. From now on, your lives will be in constant danger. These men won't stop until they get what they want. We understand, said Thomas, and we're ready. Sarah shook Thomas's hand, feeling a strength she hadn't known in years. For the first time since Daniel had disappeared, she felt she was on the right path. Not just to find him, but to honor his memory and bring justice to all who had suffered at the hands of those people. Arthur's house was in a quiet residential neighborhood, a simple but well-kept building that reflected its owner's orderly personality. They entered cautiously, checking that they weren't being followed. The Bible is on that shelf, Arthur said, pointing to a dark wooden bookcase in the living room. Sarah picked up the sacred book with reverent care. It was an old edition, clearly a family heirloom with yellowed pages from age. When she opened it, she found the small golden key between the pages of the Book of Psalms. "Do we have both keys now?" asked Thomas. "Not yet," replied Arthur. The key, Daniel had disappeared with him, but he was clever. He left a copy hidden somewhere else. "Where?" "In the apartment where you used to live, inside one of Sarah's books." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Going back to the apartment where she had lived with Daniel would be like reliving all the painful moments of her fruitless search. "Are you sure it's still there?" "The apartment is sealed. The landlord couldn't rent it after you left. People in the neighborhood got scared, thinking something bad had happened there. And they were right," Sarah murmured. "Something bad really did happen." Thomas noticed the growing tension in her voice. "You don't have to go if you don't want to. I can go alone." "No, it's my responsibility. Besides, only I know which book Daniel would choose to hide something in." "Which book would it be?" Sarah smiled sadly. "The Great Gatsby." It was his favorite book. He used to say that F. Scott Fitzgerald knew better than anyone how to portray human nature, with all its contradictions and mysteries. Arthur accompanied them to the apartment, located in an old building near the city center. The place seemed haunted, with closed windows and an air of abandonment that made anyone uncomfortable. "The building manager has the keys," said Arthur. "He's a trustworthy man. He won't ask questions." The small apartment was exactly as Sarah had left it 2 years earlier. Simple furniture, family photos on the walls, and a bookcase full of books that Daniel and she had collected over the years. Sarah went straight to the bookcase and looked for the copy of The Great Gatsby. When she found it, her hands trembled slightly. Daniel had left a small pencil X on the spine, a nearly imperceptible mark that only she would know to identify. She opened the book to the chapter Daniel always said was his favorite, the one where Jay Gatsby questions Daisy Buchanan's loyalty. Between the pages, she found not just the second key, but also a detailed map of the bank and specific instructions on how to access the safe without raising suspicion. "He thought of everything," she murmured, amazed at her brother's meticulousness. "Daniel was always very careful," Arthur agreed. "He knew that if something happened to him, you would have to be able to finish the mission on your own." Sarah studied the instructions carefully. Daniel had even indicated the best time to go to the bank, when there was more traffic and it would be easier to go unnoticed. "We can go tomorrow morning," said Thomas. "The longer we wait, the greater the risk of someone discovering our plans." "I agree, but first we need an escape plan. Once we open the safe and see the documents, these people will know within hours." Arthur sat down in a chair and assumed a grave expression. "I've thought about that. I have a brother who lives in a small town upstate about 120 miles from here, an isolated place where you can lay low while you figure out what to do with the information. And then? Then you'll need professional help. Investigative journalists, specialized lawyers, maybe even contacts in the federal government. That kind of expose can't be done just any old way." Sarah agreed. She knew that simply getting the documents wouldn't be enough. It would take a careful plan to expose the truth without being silenced first. "One thing at a time," she said. "First, let's see what Daniel found out. Then we'll decide how to use this information." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning every detail of the next day's operation. Thomas would pose as an investor interested in opening an account at the bank, creating a distraction at the branch. Sarah would enter a few minutes later, head straight to the safe deposit area, and access the information quickly. "And if it goes wrong?" asked Sarah. "It won't go wrong," Thomas replied with a confidence she envied. "We'll make it happen." That night, they checked into a small hotel on the outskirts of town. Sarah barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She was about to uncover secrets her brother had kept for years, secrets that might finally explain all the tragedies that had marked her life. Thomas was awake too in the next room, thinking about what the next day might bring. He'd committed to helping Sarah, but he knew he was putting himself in a situation that could change his life forever. Even so, he didn't regret it. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. In the early morning hours, Sarah finally managed to fall asleep, but her dreams were filled with images of Daniel, of her parents, and of the flood that had changed everything. In the dream, she was able to save them all, able to change the past and create a different future. When she woke up, she realized she might not be able to change the past, but she still had a chance to change the future. The Federal Trust Bank was busy when they arrived the next morning. It was exactly as Daniel had predicted in his instructions: peak hours, lots of customers, employees busy and distracted. Thomas went in first, heading to the new accounts department and starting an elaborate conversation about investments and business accounts. His presence drew the attention of the staff, creating exactly the distraction they needed. Sarah waited 5 minutes before entering, heading straight to the safe deposit area. She presented the 2 keys and the documentation Daniel had left, identifying herself as the sister authorized to access the safe in case of an emergency. The clerk, a young and seemingly bored man, checked the paperwork quickly and escorted her down to the safes in the bank's basement. Daniel's safe was medium-sized, located in a less busy section of the room. "You have 15 minutes, the clerk said. "Then I need to close for lunch." Sarah nodded and waited until she was alone before inserting both keys simultaneously. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing its contents. Inside there were several folders organized meticulously, each labeled with dates and codes that only she and Daniel would understand. There was also a letter addressed specifically to her in case she managed to get there. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you made it. I knew you would. The folders contain all the material I gathered over 3 years of investigation. It's more serious than you imagine, but it's also our chance to truly achieve justice. The red folder contains the evidence about the flood that took our parents. The blue folder has proof of money laundering and corruption. The yellow folder is the most dangerous one. Names, dates, the entire structure of the organization. But Sarah, there's something you need to know before deciding what to do with all of this. I'm alive. I managed to fake my disappearance, and I'm hidden in a safe place, waiting for you to get here. I couldn't get in touch before because they were monitoring everything related to you. But now that you have the evidence, we can meet. When you leave the bank, go to the central square and sit on the bench near the fountain. At exactly 2 p.m., a boy will approach you and hand you a paper with instructions. Follow them exactly, and we'll finally be able to reunite. I know you must be furious with me for all the suffering I caused, but I needed to be sure you were safe before revealing that I was alive. Forgive me, my sister. In a few hours, everything will make sense. With love and longing, Daniel P.S. The man helping you, take good care of him. From the reports I've received, he's special. Sarah had to hold the paper with both hands to control her trembling. Daniel was alive. He was alive and wanted to meet her. 2 years of searching, 2 years of pain and guilt, and he had been alive the entire time. She quickly stored all the folders in a bag she had brought specifically for that purpose. There were so many documents, evidence of crimes she never imagined existed. But at the moment, none of that mattered as much as the revelation that her brother was waiting for her. She left the bank trying to stay calm, but inside, she was euphoric. Thomas was waiting for her in the car, clearly anxious for the results. "So?" he asked when she got into the vehicle. "He's alive, Thomas. Daniel is alive." Sarah quickly told him about the letter and the instructions for the meeting. Thomas was both relieved and worried at the same time. "That's wonderful, Sarah, but it could also be a trap." How do we know the letter was really written by him? Because only he would know certain things written there. Details about our childhood, about how we organized our books, about... She paused, blushing. About you. About me? He wrote that he received reports about the man helping me. That you're special. Thomas felt a wave of emotion that caught him off guard. Even without knowing him, Daniel had recognized the value of his feelings for Sarah. How could he have received reports? I don't know. But Daniel was always very careful, very observant. If he managed to hide for 2 years, he certainly managed to stay informed about me. They drove to the central square and found the bench near the fountain. Sarah sat exactly where the letter indicated, with Thomas staying at a nearby cafe where he could watch everything. At exactly 2 p.m., a boy about 12 years old approached the bench. "Are you Sarah Miller?" he asked. "Yes, I am. I have a message for you." The boy handed her a folded paper and ran off before she could ask any questions. Sarah opened the paper with trembling hands. "Sarah, take the 3:30 p.m. bus heading to Woodstock. Get off at the second stop after the main church. Walk 2 blocks north and look for a blue house with a rose garden. Knock 3 times on the door, pause, then knock twice more. Come alone. If you bring anyone, I'll have to disappear again for our safety. I know you can trust the man helping you. Ask him to wait at the bus station. If everything goes well, you two can meet soon. Daniel." Sarah returned to the cafe where Thomas was waiting and showed him the instructions. "He wants me to go alone," she said, clearly torn between joy and concern. "Sarah, this could be very dangerous. What if it really is a trap? And what if it really is my brother?" "I can't miss this chance, Thomas. It's what I've been looking for 2 years." Thomas knew she was right, but the thought of letting her go alone terrified him. In recent days he had grown used to protecting her, to being by her side facing challenges together. "At least let me go with you to town. I can wait at the bus station while you meet him." Sarah nodded, grateful for his concern. She knew it wasn't easy for Thomas to let her face this alone, especially after everything they'd been through together. The bus ride to Woodstock took an hour and a half. Throughout the trip, Sarah tried to imagine what it would be like to see Daniel again. Would he have changed a lot? Would he still be the same protective brother she knew? Thomas stayed at the bus station as agreed, but he couldn't focus on anything other than his worry for Sarah. In a few days, she had become the most important person in his life, and the idea of losing her terrified him. Sarah followed the instructions to the letter, walking through the quiet streets of the small town until she found the blue house with a rose garden. It was a simple but cozy building, exactly the kind of place where someone could hide without drawing attention. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door as instructed. 3 times, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened slowly, revealing a man she barely recognized. Daniel was thinner, unshaven, with longer hair, but they were definitely the same gentle eyes she remembered. "Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Daniel!" They embraced at the door, crying and laughing at the same time. 2 years of separation, 2 years of pain and uncertainty had finally come to an end. "Come in, quickly," Daniel said, glancing nervously at the street. "We can't attract attention." Inside the house, Sarah could better study the changes in her brother. He was clearly more mature, marked by the hardships he had faced, but he was still the same Daniel she knew and loved. "Why, Daniel? Why didn't you tell me you were okay? You know what I went through looking for you?" "I know, sis, and forgive me. But it was the only way to keep you safe. They were monitoring everything related to you. If they knew I was still alive and in touch with you, they would have used that against us." "Who are they? Who are these people?" Daniel led her to the simple living room and sat beside her on the couch. "It's a much bigger organization than we imagined, Sarah. They're not just ordinary criminals. They're people with real power, with connections in the government, the police, big corporations. The money laundering scheme was just the tip of the iceberg." "And our parents?" Daniel sighed deeply before answering. Dad found out that the company he worked for was being used to transport more than just legal goods. He started asking questions, taking notes. When they threatened to fire him, he said he was going to report everything he knew. And they caused the flood to silence him? To silence several people who were starting to uncover things. The opening of the floodgates was coordinated to look like a natural accident, but it was a mass murder. Sarah felt anger growing in her chest. Her parents hadn't just been tragically lost. They had been murdered for trying to do the right thing. Daniel, we have to report this. We have to get justice. That's why I gathered all this evidence, but Sarah, you need to understand, once we make this report, our lives will never be the same. They'll try to silence us by any means possible. So what do we do? Stay hidden forever? Daniel looked at his sister with a determination she hadn't seen in years. No. We make the report, but we do it right. With protection. With guarantees that our story will be heard before anything happens to us. How? I have a contact at a major newspaper, an investigative journalist who specializes in this kind of case. He can give us protection and make sure the story gets published simultaneously in several outlets, making it impossible to cover up. Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. And Thomas? Ah, yes. The man who's been helping you. From the reports I've received, he seems like a good person, someone you can trust. How did you get reports about him? Daniel smiled for the first time since she had arrived. I have friends in the area where he lives, people who owe me favors and keep an eye out for strange movements. When I found out you were being helped by a local rancher, I asked them to look into it. And what did they find out? That Thomas Harrison is exactly what he seems, a good man who's been through hardship and decided to help you without asking for anything in return. The kind of person we need on our side in this fight. Sarah felt her heart warm as she heard Daniel validate her feelings about Thomas. Daniel, I think I'm falling for him. I know, Daniel said with a smile. It's in your eyes when you talk about him. And from the reports it seems he feels the same way about you. How can you know that? Because a man doesn't risk his own life for a stranger unless he has very personal reasons. And because my friends said he talks about you as if you were the most precious thing in the world. Sarah blushed but felt a happiness she hadn't experienced in years. Despite all the dangers and uncertainties, she had found not only her brother, but also someone special in Thomas. So what do we do now? Now we go get your boyfriend at the bus station and plan our next move. We've been hiding long enough, it's time to fight. Sarah and Daniel walked together back to the bus station, she telling him everything that had happened over the last 2 years, and him explaining how he had managed to survive in hiding. When they arrived, they found Thomas pacing nervously on the platform. "Thomas!" Sarah called out. He turned around, and his face immediately lit up when he saw that she was okay. When he noticed the man beside her, he knew right away it was Daniel. "You must be Thomas," Daniel said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Daniel Miller." "The pleasure is mine," Thomas replied, shaking the offered hand firmly. "Your sister has told me a lot about you, and I've heard very good things about you, too. Thank you for taking care of Sarah when I couldn't." Thomas blushed slightly, but kept his gaze steady. "I didn't do anything more than any decent person would." "You did a lot more than that," Daniel said seriously, "and our family doesn't forget that kind of kindness." The three of them went to a small cafe near the bus station to talk more privately. Daniel explained the whole situation to Thomas, the investigation he had done, the evidence they had, and the plan to expose the truth. "It's very dangerous," Thomas said when Daniel finished. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied. "If we do nothing, they'll keep killing innocent people, and we'll always have to live in fear." "She's right," Daniel agreed. "This is our chance to bring justice, not only for our parents, but for all the families who have suffered at the hands of these people." Thomas nodded, understanding the importance of what they were planning. "How can I help?" "You've already helped more than you can imagine," Daniel said. "But if you want to stay with us, we'll need a safe place to lie low while the journalist investigates and publishes the story. My ranch is at your disposal. It's isolated and I know the area well. I can guarantee you'll be safe there." Sarah looked at Thomas with gratitude and love. Even knowing the risks, he was willing to protect them. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't need to thank me. We're a family now." The word family struck a deep chord in all three. Daniel, because he had finally found someone trustworthy for his sister. Sarah, because she felt her life was rebuilding in a way she never imagined. And Thomas, because, for the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. "Then let's go home," Sarah said, looking warmly at Thomas. "We have a lot of work ahead." And so the three of them headed together to the ranch, which had become not just a refuge, but a place where a new family was being born, bound not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love. The trip back to the ranch was marked by intense conversations about the future. Daniel explained in detail what he had uncovered during his years of investigation, revealing the frightening extent of the corruption they had discovered. "It's much bigger than we thought," he said, flipping through some of the folders Sarah had taken from the safe. "These aren't just isolated crimes. It's a whole system built on corruption and violence." Thomas drove in silence, absorbing the gravity of the information. He was beginning to truly understand the danger Sarah had faced during her search, and he admired her courage and determination even more. "Daniel," Sarah said, "I need to know, during those 2 years, did you always know where I was?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Not always, but I tried to stay informed through acquaintances in various towns. I knew you were looking for me, and that made me both worried and proud at the same time." "Why proud?" "Because it shows what kind of person you really are. A lot of people would have given up, moved on with their own lives. But you didn't. You fought for our family even when it seemed impossible." Sarah felt her eyes well up with tears. For 2 years she had wondered if she was doing the right thing, if she shouldn't just accept that Daniel was gone and try to rebuild her life. "There were moments when I almost gave up," she admitted, "but you didn't give up, and that made all the difference." When they arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Daniel looked around the property approvingly. "It's a beautiful place," he remarked. "Peaceful. Our parents would have liked it here." Sarah smiled, imagining what it would have been like to live there with the whole family. It was a painful thought, but also a comforting one. "Thomas takes great care of this place," she said. "And the horses, too." Daniel walked over to the corral where Thomas's 2 horses were grazing calmly. "May I?" he asked, reaching out to one of the animals. "Of course," Thomas replied. "Mrs. Pearl was right. You really do know horses." Daniel stroked the animal with steady, gentle movements. It was clear he had a natural gift, just as Sarah had described. "It was always my dream to work with horses," he said. "Before all this happened, I thought about opening an equine rehabilitation center, using horses to help people with emotional or physical challenges." "That's a beautiful idea," Sarah said. "And who knows, when all this is over—" "When all this is over," Daniel agreed. "But first we have to make sure there will be an after." That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch of the house, planning their next steps. Daniel explained that he had arranged a meeting with the investigative journalist for the following week. "He's a trustworthy man," Daniel said. "He works for one of the country's largest newspapers and has experience with sensitive cases like this, but he'll want to check all the evidence before committing." "And if he decides it's too dangerous to publish?" Thomas asked. "Then we find other journalists, or we leak the information online. One way or another, the truth will come to light." Sarah watched the 2 most important men in her life talking, and she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. She had her brother back, she had someone she loved by her side, and she finally had hope that justice would be done. "And then?" she asked. "After the story is published, what do we do?" "We'll have to be very careful," Daniel replied. "We'll probably need to stay hidden for a while, until the proper authorities take the necessary steps." "You can stay here as long as you need," Thomas offered. "This ranch can be a sanctuary for you." Sarah looked at him with deep gratitude. "Are you sure? This could last months." "I'm sure. Actually," Thomas hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I hope that even after everything is resolved, you'll consider staying. This ranch has gotten very lonely over the years. It could use a real family." Daniel looked from Sarah to Thomas and smiled. "I think my sister has already made that decision in her heart," he said. Now it's just a matter of time before she admits it to herself. Sarah blushed, but didn't deny it. It was true that she had already started thinking of the ranch as her home, of Thomas as more than a temporary ally. "Let's see how things unfold," she said diplomatically. But that night, when she went to sleep in the barn that had become her room, Sarah allowed herself to dream of a different future, a future where she and Daniel could live in peace, where she and Thomas could build something together, where the ranch would truly become a home for all of them. The next morning they were woken by urgent knocks at the door. Thomas went to answer and found a nervous man who identified himself as Frank, a neighbor who lived a few miles away. "Thomas, strange men are asking questions about you in town, asking if you're putting someone up, if you have visitors." Thomas's blood ran cold. It was exactly what they feared. "What kind of men?" "They're not from around here. They say they're private investigators, but they look like debt collectors, the kind you don't want to meet." Daniel and Sarah appeared at the door, having overheard the conversation. "They got here faster than we expected," Daniel said in a tense voice. "What do we do?" asked Sarah. "We leave here now," Daniel replied. "Frank, thank you so much for the warning. Can you pretend you never saw us?" "Of course, but where will you go?" "It's better if you don't know," Thomas said. "The less you know, the safer you'll be." Within minutes, they gathered their few belongings and the precious evidence. Thomas let the horses out into the larger pasture, making sure they'd have food and water for a few days, and locked up the house. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, looking at the ranch that had become a refuge. "We've brought trouble to your home." "You didn't bring trouble," Thomas replied. "You brought purpose. Now let's get out of here before it's too late." They left via the back road, avoiding the main entrance to the property. Daniel had studied maps of the area and knew alternate routes that would keep them off the main roads. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked as he drove along a narrow dirt road. "I know a place," Daniel said. "An abandoned cabin about 30 miles from here. I used it a few times over these 2 years. It's isolated and safe." During the drive, Sarah couldn't stop looking back, hoping to see signs of pursuit. The reality of the danger had become sudden and concrete. "Daniel, do you think they know about the meeting with the journalist?" "I hope not, but we'll have to be even more careful. Maybe it's best to postpone until we're sure it's safe." "We can't keep running forever," Sarah said. "It's bound to end someday." "It will end," Daniel assured her, "but it has to be on our terms, not theirs." The cabin sat in a small clearing in the middle of a wooded area. It was a rustic but solid structure, clearly abandoned for years, yet still livable. "How did you find this place?" Thomas asked while checking the structure. "By chance. I was running from some pursuers about a year ago and hid here. I found out it belongs to a man who's lived abroad for decades. No one ever comes here." They spent the day organizing the cabin and planning their next moves. Daniel decided to try contacting the journalist from a secure phone to reschedule the meeting for a different location. "I managed to talk to him," Daniel reported when he returned from a walk to the nearest town, where there was a payphone. "He's worried. He said he's also had visits from people asking about the investigations he's been doing." "Does that mean they know about him?" Sarah asked. "Maybe. Or maybe it's a coincidence. Either way, he wants to move our meeting up. Tomorrow night at a place he'll choose." "That's risky," Thomas said. "Everything's risky now," Daniel replied. "But if we wait any longer, we might lose our only chance." That night, the three stayed awake, planning every detail of the next day's meeting. Sarah felt a mix of fear and anticipation. She was about to make the decision that would change their lives forever. "Sarah," Daniel said during a pause in the conversation, "I want you to know that no matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you, of who you've become, of the strength you've shown. Thank you. But I couldn't have made it this far alone." "Yes, you could," Thomas said. "You're stronger than you think." Sarah looked at the two men and felt a wave of gratitude and love. They had become her family, her strength, her reason to keep fighting. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "promise me we'll face it together. No matter the outcome, we stick together." "We promise," Daniel and Thomas said simultaneously. And in that abandoned cabin in the middle of the woods, the three sealed a pact that would bind them forever, regardless of the challenges yet to come. The journalist chose a small restaurant in an industrial town about 60 miles from the cabin. It was a busy place, full of local workers, where 3 extra people wouldn't draw attention. Sarah, Daniel, and Thomas arrived separately, as agreed. The journalist, who introduced himself as Michael Henderson, was a middle-aged man with a serious expression and intelligent eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Did you bring the material?" he asked without preamble. Daniel opened a discreet folder and showed some of the most compelling evidence. Michael studied the documents with growing attention, his expression becoming graver by the minute. This is bigger than I imagined," he murmured. "If this information is verified, we're talking about the biggest corruption scandal of the decade." "It's all true," Daniel assured him. "I spent 3 years checking every detail." "I believe you, but you're going to need protection. This kind of accusation puts your lives at real risk." "We're already at risk," Sarah said. "The difference is that now we have a chance to do something productive with that risk." Michael studied her with interest. "You're the sister who looked for him for 2 years." "Yes." "Impressive. Your story alone is already a compelling piece. The relentless search, the reunion, the discovery of the truth. It has all the elements to move the public." "We don't want sensationalism," Daniel said. "We want justice." "And you'll get both," Michael assured them. "But you need to understand, once this story is published, your lives will change forever. You're going to become public figures, symbols of the fight against corruption. It won't be easy." Sarah and Daniel exchanged glances. It was exactly what they feared, but also what they knew was necessary. "When can you publish?" Daniel asked. "I need at least a week to verify the information and write the piece, and I'll want police protection for you before publication." "Police protection?" questioned Thomas. "How do we know who to trust?" "I have contacts in Washington, D.C. People I know are honest. I'll present the case directly to them." It was a risky plan, but it seemed like the best option available. Michael assured them he'd handle the case with utmost confidentiality until publication, and he'd do everything possible to protect their identity until the very last moment. "One last thing," he said as they prepared to leave. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no turning back." Sarah looked at Daniel, then at Thomas. She saw determination in both their eyes, the same determination she felt growing in her own chest. "We're sure," she said. "Our parents deserve justice. All the families who have suffered deserve justice." "Then let's make history," Michael said, shaking each of their hands. Over the following week, they stayed hidden in the cabin while Michael worked on the piece. It was a tense time, marked by anticipation and fear of what was to come. Thomas used the time to get to know Daniel better, impressed by the young man's intelligence and determination. Daniel, in turn, observed the growing relationship between his sister and Thomas, fully approving of the connection between them. "Are you two going to get married when all this is over?" he asked Sarah one afternoon, while Thomas had stepped out to get supplies. "Daniel?" she exclaimed, blushing. "We're not even officially dating yet, but you will be. It's obvious you love each other." Sarah couldn't deny it. It was true that her feelings for Thomas had grown each day, deepening into something far beyond gratitude. "And you? Is there someone special?" Daniel grew thoughtful. "There was a girl, before all this happened, but I can't involve her in this. It wouldn't be fair. After everything is resolved, we'll see. First, we need to make sure there will be an after." On Thursday, Michael called with news. "The piece is ready. It's devastating, but I also got the protection I promised. Federal agents will pick you up tomorrow to take you to a safe location before publication." "When does the piece come out?" Daniel asked. "Sunday morning. Simultaneously in 3 newspapers and online. It'll be impossible to suppress." It was the news they had been waiting for, but also the moment when their lives would change forever. On that last night at the cabin, the 3 of them stayed up late, talking about the future. "No matter what happens," Sarah said, "I want you both to know that you are the most important people in my life. Together we made it this far. Together we'll face whatever comes." Always together, Daniel agreed. Always together, Thomas echoed, and when the sun rose the next morning, they were ready to face the future, united by the family they had chosen to form and the determination to see justice prevail. The federal agents arrived promptly at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. There were 2 men and 1 woman, all with professional but kind expressions. The woman, who introduced herself as Agent Thompson, explained the protection protocol. "You'll stay in a safe house until Monday. After the piece is published, we'll assess whether protection needs to be extended." "And if it does?" Sarah asked. "Then we'll do it. The federal government is very interested in this case. The information you've provided could dismantle a corruption network that's been operating for decades." The safe house was on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., a discreet yet comfortable property with undercover guards and all the amenities needed for a long stay. Over the weekend, the 3 of them lived in a strange suspension of time. They knew their lives were about to change drastically, but for now they existed in a bubble of safety and calm. "I'm nervous," Sarah admitted on Saturday night. "That's normal," Daniel said. "I am too, but it's a good kind of nervous. It's the feeling that we're finally going to make a difference. What if people don't believe us? What if they think we're making it all up?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Thomas assured them. "Michael is a respected journalist. If he published it, he's certain of the information's truth." On Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, the safe house phone rang. It was Michael. "It's out," he said simply. "The article is in the streets, and it's already having the impact we expected." Within hours, the story was on every news program in the country. "Siblings uncover corruption scheme that led to flood that killed their parents" was the headline in all major newspapers. The evidence Daniel had presented was undeniable. Documents, recordings, bank records, everything meticulously organized and verified. The article not only exposed the money laundering scheme, but also revealed the truth about the tragedy that had devastated several families years before. "The phone won't stop ringing," Agent Thompson reported. "Journalists, lawyers, families of other victims, everyone wants to talk to you." "We're ready," Sarah said. In the following days, Daniel, Sarah, and Thomas became national figures. Their photos were on every magazine cover. Their interviews aired on every television program. Sarah's courage in seeking out her long-lost brother, Daniel's determination to gather evidence, and Thomas's unwavering support captured the public's imagination. More importantly, the authorities acted quickly. Arrests were made, investigations were opened, and other victims began to come forward with their own stories. "We did it," Daniel said one morning, reading the newspapers that reported yet another arrest related to the case. "We really did it." "Did what?" Sarah asked. "Justice. For our parents, for all the families who suffered, for ourselves." It was true. After years of pain and searching, justice had finally come. But more than that, there was hope for the future. 3 months after the article was published, when the media frenzy had died down and the investigations were proceeding, the 3 of them met again at Thomas's ranch. "It's good to be home," Sarah said, looking at the familiar landscape. "It's good to have you home," Thomas replied. Daniel had decided to stay at the ranch permanently, helping Thomas with the horses and starting to put into practice his dream of creating an equine therapy center. Sarah had also chosen to stay, discovering that this remote place offered the peace she had always sought. "Daniel," she said one afternoon, as they watched Thomas work with one of the horses, "do you think our parents would be proud?" "I'm sure they would. We did more than seek justice. We built a new family, found a new purpose, created something beautiful out of the pain. And now we live, really live, without fear, without guilt, without needing to look back." That night Thomas proposed to Sarah. It was a simple proposal, made on the porch of the house where she had first found shelter, with Daniel as witness and the stars as a blessing. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I want to build a life with you." 1 year later, the ranch had completely transformed. Daniel's equestrian therapy center was up and running, helping children and adults overcome trauma through their connection with the horses. Sarah had opened a small cafe on the property, which became a gathering spot for the local community, and Thomas had found not only love, but a family and a purpose that made every day worth living. In the spring, during a celebration for the first anniversary of the therapy center, Sarah looked around and saw everything they had built together. Children laughing as they learned to care for the horses, families gathered in celebration, Daniel patiently teaching a shy girl to ride for the first time. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, approaching her. "I'm thinking that the storm that brought me here was the best thing that ever happened to me, even with all the suffering that came before, especially because of it. If I hadn't gone through all of that, I never would have found you. I never would have discovered what I'm capable of. I never would have learned that sometimes you have to go through the darkness to find the light." Thomas hugged her, looking at the same scene she was watching. "And now? Now we enjoy every day of this life we built together. Every moment of peace, every small victory, every smile from the children we help. Forever? Forever." And as the sun set on that ranch that had become a sanctuary for so many, Sarah knew she had found much more than shelter from the storm. She had found her home, her family, and her purpose in life. Daniel approached them, holding a little girl in his arms who had just finished her first therapy session. "Sarah, Thomas, I want you to meet Lily. She came here completely traumatized by a car accident. Today was the first time she's smiled since she arrived." The girl waved shyly at them, and Sarah felt her heart fill with pure joy. This was what made everything worthwhile: the ability to turn pain into healing, trauma into growth, fear into courage. "Hi, Lily," Sarah said warmly. "So nice to meet you. I bet you and the horses are going to be great friends." "Aunt Claire said horses can tell when you're sad," Lily said in a small voice. "That's true. And they also know when you're happy. They're very smart." Lily smiled again, and Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Daniel and Thomas. This was what mattered. Every smile earned, every trauma healed, every life transformed. That night, when all the visitors had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, the three sat on the porch as they did every evening. "Do you believe in fate?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Why?" Daniel questioned. "Because sometimes I think all of this happened for a reason. The flood, your disappearance, my search, meeting Thomas, as if it were all part of a bigger plan." "Maybe so," Thomas said thoughtfully. "Or maybe it's just life happening, and we're the ones who decide what to do with what it gives us." "I think both things can be true," Daniel said. "Maybe fate puts us in situations, but we're the ones who choose how to react to them." Sarah nodded, satisfied with that philosophy. Whether it was fate or coincidence, what mattered was that they had made the right choices when it counted. They had chosen to fight instead of give up, to love instead of hate, to build instead of destroy. "You know what makes me happiest," she said. "What?" they both asked in unison. "The fact that our story didn't end with revenge or bitterness. It ended with new life, hope, family. We managed to turn tragedy into something beautiful. And it's not just our story," Daniel added. "Every child we help here is writing their own story of overcoming." "Like Lily," said Thomas. "Like Lily. And like us." A gentle breeze swept across the ranch, carrying the scent of flowers and hay, the sounds of horses moving calmly in the pasture. It was a moment of perfect peace, the kind of moment Sarah had learned to value above all else. "Thomas," she said suddenly. "Yes? Thank you for giving me shelter during that first storm. Thank you for teaching me that it's worth taking risks for the people we love." "Daniel," she said, turning to her brother. "Yes? Thank you for never giving up, even when I didn't know you were fighting. Thank you for never giving up on finding me, even when it seemed impossible." And there, on the porch of that ranch which had become far more than a home, the three of them once again sealed the bond that would unite them forever. A family formed not by blood alone, but by the conscious choice to support, protect, and love each other unconditionally. Months passed, and life on the ranch settled into a calm, productive rhythm. Daniel's Equine Therapy Center gained national recognition, receiving visitors from other states who wanted to learn his techniques. Sarah expanded the cafe, also creating a small market for local organic products. Thomas had become a respected figure in the community, not just as a rancher, but as someone who had opened his doors to a project that benefited so many people. One day, at the beginning of fall, Sarah was organizing some documents at the cafe when she found a folder she hadn't seen in months. They were the original letters Daniel had sent to Thomas before disappearing, when he was still posing as Stephen Rogers. She read them again with curiosity, trying to identify the signs she had missed the first time. It was fascinating to see how Daniel had carefully investigated Thomas's character through those seemingly simple letters about horses. "Find something interesting?" asked Thomas, approaching. "The letters Daniel sent you. It's amazing how he managed to assess who you were just through answers about horses." Thomas sat down beside her and picked up one of the letters. "Actually, I was also trying to figure out who this Stephen Rogers was. There was something about his questions that made me suspect he wasn't just a horse trader." "What do you mean?" "The questions were very specific about my character, my honesty, whether I could be trusted. They weren't questions someone only interested in business would ask." Sarah smiled, realizing her brother had found in Thomas exactly what he was looking for, someone upright enough to protect her if necessary. "Daniel planned everything from the start," she murmured. "Not everything. He didn't plan for us to fall in love." "Are you sure?" Sarah showed one of the last letters, where Daniel asked subtle questions about Thomas's family, whether he was single, if he missed having company. Thomas reread the letter with growing attention. "My God, do you think he was doing some kind of matchmaking?" "I think he was preparing for every possible scenario, including the possibility that I might need more than just temporary protection." They laughed together at the situation. It was typical of Daniel to be so meticulous and careful, even in matters of the heart. "Well, if that's what he wanted, he got it," said Thomas. "I can't imagine my life without you, nor I without you." At that moment, Daniel appeared at the cafe door with a curious expression. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" "About your letters," said Sarah, showing the documents. "We discovered you weren't just investigating Thomas's integrity, you were playing matchmaker." Daniel blushed slightly, but smiled. "Well, I needed to be sure that if something happened to me, you'd be not just safe, but happy too." "And you chose well," said Thomas, "but it must have been hard leaving something so important to chance." "It wasn't chance. I watched his responses for months. The way he treated the horses, how he talked about responsibility, how he showed empathy even in practical matters. I knew he was a good man." Sarah stood up and hugged her brother. "Thank you for looking out for my future, even when you were busy surviving yourself." "That's what brothers do," Daniel said simply. That afternoon, the three of them decided to do something they hadn't done in a while: visit the town where Sarah and Daniel had grown up. They wanted to see the memorial that had been built in honor of the flood victims, now that the truth about the tragedy's causes had been revealed. The memorial was simple but touching: a small square with a garden and a plaque bearing the names of everyone who had lost their lives. Their parents' names were there, along with dozens of others. "It's beautiful," said Sarah, placing flowers at the site. "Mom and Dad would be happy to know the truth finally came out." "And that we managed to turn this pain into something positive," added Daniel. Thomas remained respectfully silent, letting the siblings have their moment with their parents' memory. As they prepared to leave, an elderly woman approached them. "Excuse me, are you Sarah and Daniel Miller?" "We are," Sarah replied. "I'm Mrs. Martha. I lost my husband and my daughter in that flood. I want to thank you for finding the courage to reveal the truth. All these years I knew there was something wrong with the official story, but I never had a way to prove it." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Martha. And I am for your parents. But look how life works. From our shared pain came a strength that managed to bring justice. That's a miracle." "It sure is," Daniel agreed. "And I've heard about the work you're doing with the children at the ranch. I have a granddaughter who could benefit from the therapy. She's never fully recovered from the trauma of losing her parents." "She'll be very welcome," Daniel said immediately. "I'll give you my contact information." When Mrs. Martha walked away with the therapy center's information, Sarah turned to her companions. "This is what makes it all worth it," she said. Every person we help, every family that finds peace, and every new story that gets a chance at a different ending," added Thomas. During the drive back to the ranch, they talked about plans to expand the therapy center. There was growing demand, and Daniel dreamed of helping even more people. "We could build more facilities," he said, "maybe even create a training program for other therapists. And a place for families coming from far away to stay," suggested Sarah. "All of that costs money," Thomas reminded them. "But I believe we'll manage. Your work is gaining recognition and there are many people willing to support good causes." It was true. Ever since their story had become public, several organizations and individuals had offered help for the project. What had started as a refuge for 3 traumatized people was turning into something much bigger. When they arrived at the ranch, they found a surprise waiting for them. Michael Henderson, the journalist who had published their story, was on the porch talking to some of the center's staff. "Michael," Sarah exclaimed. "Great to see you." "Hi, everyone. Hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" Daniel asked. "A documentary. An international production company wants to tell your complete story, from the initial tragedy to the founding of the therapy center. It would be a way to inspire others and also to raise funds to expand the project." Sarah, Daniel, and Thomas exchanged glances. It was a tempting opportunity, but it would also mean exposing their lives even more publicly. "We need to think about it," Sarah said. "Of course. You don't have to decide now, but I want you to know it would be handled with the utmost respect and sensitivity. The idea isn't to sensationalize, but to inspire." That night, the 3 debated the proposal at length. There were valid arguments on both sides. "On one hand, it could help many people going through similar situations," Sarah said. "On the other, it would mean less privacy for us," Thomas mused. "But it's not about us anymore," Daniel said. "It's about all the people we could help with this exposure." In the end, they decided to accept the proposal, with specific conditions about how the story would be told, and that part of the proceeds would go to the therapy center. The documentary production took several months, with cameras following the daily routine at the center and in-depth interviews with each of them. It was a sometimes painful process, reliving difficult moments, but also cathartic. When the documentary was released, it became a worldwide phenomenon. The story of Sarah searching for her missing brother, the discovery of the truth about her parents' death, and the transformation of a ranch into a healing sanctuary touched millions of people. More importantly, it inspired the creation of similar projects in several countries. Daniel began receiving invitations to give lectures and teach his equine therapy techniques around the world. "I never imagined our personal story could have such a big impact," Sarah said in an interview for an international magazine. "I think it's because it's a story about the strength of family love and the human ability to turn tragedy into hope," Daniel replied. "Those are universal themes." "And about the importance of never giving up on the people we love," Thomas added. 2 years after the documentary's release, the ranch's equine therapy center had become a worldwide reference. They received visitors from dozens of countries, all interested in learning about their techniques and philosophy. Sarah and Thomas had gotten married in a simple ceremony on the ranch itself, with Daniel as the best man and several of the children who attended the center as special participants. Daniel had reconnected with the girlfriend he thought he had lost forever. After watching the documentary, she had gotten in touch and they had resumed their relationship. They now lived together in a house built specifically for them on the property. "It's funny," Sarah said one afternoon, watching the children play with the horses. "When this all started, I just wanted to find my brother. I never imagined I'd end up finding a whole family." "And helping hundreds of other families in the process," Thomas said. "Sometimes I think about what our parents would say if they could see all this," Daniel said, joining them. "I think they'd say it was worth it," Sarah replied, "that the pain we went through had a greater purpose. And that love always wins in the end," Thomas added. At that moment, Lily, the girl who had been one of the center's first patients, came running up. Now 10 years old, she had become one of Daniel's junior assistants, helping with the younger children. "Aunt Sarah," she exclaimed, The new girl is scared of the horses. Can you come help? Of course, honey. Sarah followed Lily to where a little girl about 6 years old was standing at a safe distance from the horses, clearly interested but frightened. Hi, sweetheart, Sarah said, crouching down to the child's level. What's your name? Grace, the girl answered in a tiny voice. Grace, what a beautiful name. You want to meet the horses, but you're a little scared, aren't you? They're so big. They sure are, but you know what I'll tell you, sometimes they get scared of us too. They do? They do, yes. You know why? Because we're different from them. But when we get to know someone better, the fear goes away and can turn into friendship. Sarah reached out her hand to Grace. Want to try meeting Star with me? He's the gentlest of them all. The girl hesitated for a moment, then placed her little hand in Sarah's. Together they approached the horse, who lowered his head as if he understood he needed to be extra careful. Look at that, Sarah whispered. He's saying hello to you. Grace smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, and timidly reached out to touch the animal's soft muzzle. It's soft, she said, amazed. It is. And now you two are already friends. Daniel watched the scene from a distance with a proud smile. This was what made all the work worthwhile. Every moment of overcoming, every smile earned, every fear conquered. Another life changed, he murmured to Thomas. Thanks to your work. Thanks to all of our work. This place only works because it's a real family taking care of other families. It was true. The center had become much more than a therapeutic project. It was a community, a place where people with difficult stories found not only healing, but also belonging. That night, during the community dinner that happened every Friday at the ranch, Sarah looked around the large table where staff, patients, visitors, and families sat. It was an eclectic mix of people that fate had brought together in that special place. I'd like to make a toast, she said, standing up with a glass of juice in her hand. Everyone stopped talking and looked at her closely. 4 years ago, I arrived here running from a storm, not knowing I was running toward my destiny. Today I look at all of you and see not just colleagues or patients, but a chosen family, united by the common purpose of turning pain into healing. To our home, said Daniel, raising his glass. To our family, added Thomas. To hope, said Lily, mimicking the adults. To life, concluded Sarah. And on that ranch that had become a beacon of hope for so many people, they all toasted not only to the present they had built together, but to the future they would still create. Months later, on a particularly beautiful spring morning, Sarah woke up with a different feeling. There was something in the air that indicated change, newness, a new chapter beginning. She found Thomas in the kitchen, making coffee like he did every morning. Good morning, love, he said, kissing her tenderly. Good morning, Thomas. I need to tell you something. What is it? He asked, noticing something special in her tone of voice. I'm pregnant. Thomas almost dropped the cup he was holding. For a moment he stood completely still, processing the information. Are you sure? Absolutely. I took the test 3 times. A huge smile spread across Thomas's face, and he lifted her off the ground in an enthusiastic hug. A baby! We're going to have a baby! Their joy caught Daniel's attention, and he appeared in the kitchen, curious to know the reason for the celebration. What's going on here? You're going to be an uncle, announced Sarah, radiant. Daniel stopped for a moment, then started laughing and crying at the same time. A baby! Our family is going to grow. And what a family that baby will have, said Thomas. He'll grow up surrounded by love, horses, children of all ages, learning from a young age about compassion and healing. He'll be the luckiest kid in the world, agreed Daniel. That day, the news spread through the ranch like wildfire. All the employees, patients, and visitors were thrilled with the news. It was as if the whole community was expecting a baby. Lily was one of the most excited. Can I help take care of the baby? She asked Sarah. Of course you can, sweetheart. You're going to be a very special big sister. I'll teach him everything about horses. Or her, Sarah corrected with a smile. Or her. Whatever. I'll teach everything anyway. Over the following months, the entire ranch prepared for the baby's arrival. Daniel built a beautiful nursery in Sarah and Thomas's house, overlooking the pasture where the horses grazed peacefully. The children from the center made drawings to decorate the room, and several families who had been helped by the project sent gifts and heartfelt letters. "This baby is already loved by hundreds of people," said Sarah, stroking her growing belly. "And he'll grow up knowing he has a huge family," said Thomas. "The best family anyone could have," added Daniel. When Sarah went into labor one autumn morning, the whole ranch went into a cheerful state of alert. Daniel drove to the hospital while Thomas held Sarah's hand, and Lily organized all the other children to say a special prayer for everything to go well. A few hours later, a perfect baby girl was born, with her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. When Sarah held her for the first time, she knew immediately what her name would be. "Hope," she said, looking at her daughter with endless love. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Santos Harrison," said Thomas, completing the name. "It's perfect," Daniel agreed, with tears in his eyes. When they returned to the ranch with the baby, they were greeted like heroes. Lily had arranged special decorations, and all the children sang a welcome song they had secretly rehearsed. "Welcome to our home, Hope," said Lily solemnly, as if she were the official ambassador of all the ranch children. That night, with Hope sleeping peacefully in the crib beside the bed, Sarah and Thomas talked about the future. "What kind of world will our daughter grow up in?" Sarah asked. "A better world," Thomas answered with conviction. "Because people like us, like your brother, like all the families we've helped here, are working every day to make it better. And she'll be part of that change. She'll grow up knowing she has the power to turn pain into hope, exactly as we did." "As you did," Thomas corrected. "It all started with your courage to never give up looking for Daniel." "No," said Sarah. "It all started with you giving me shelter in a storm. If you had sent me away that night, I would never do that. From the very first moment, I knew you were special, even as a wet, desperate stranger. Especially because of that, anyone can be kind when they have a reason to be. You showed strength and determination when you had no reason to have hope." Sarah looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully, and smiled. "Hope always has a reason to exist. Sometimes we just need someone to help us find that reason. Like you helped me find mine. And like you helped me find mine." Outside, a light rain began to fall, but this time the sound was comforting instead of frightening. Sarah was no longer afraid of storms. Now she knew that sometimes the heaviest rains bring the greatest blessings. End of story. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story of Sarah, Daniel, and Thomas. Do you believe true love can blossom even in the most difficult situations? Leave your opinion in the comments and share if you've ever had an experience that changed your life forever. Don't forget to hit like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.